All right, everybody. Welcome to my session, When Headlines Hit, They Strike, Predicting AI-Driven News Scams. I'm Piazza. I'm a cybersecurity strategist at Before.ai, and I wanted to talk today about the exploits that we're seeing out there that are news-driven. So first, we're going to talk about how AI is changing the game when it comes to internet attacks. Then we're going to talk about how we've been developing some threat reports, and we're going to go over which ones they are. And then we're going to go deeper into some of those that were either disaster-driven or newsworthy material that was exploited by attackers. And we're going to drill down on how they're executing these things. Time allowing, I have a couple of other bonuses to cover with you. Number one being how to actually develop these threat reports, if you're interested. And number two, what are the psychological levers that are being exploited by these attackers and who they are. Does that sound like a plan? All right, I'm gonna need a little bit more from you today, right? I wanted to make this a little bit more interactive. Does that sound like a plan? Love it, love it. All right, so let's get started by talking about how AI is being used by attackers. First and foremost, they're using this for good old reconnaissance, right? They're finding targets online and they're deriving a lot of information. In this time, they do not need to do the work manually. They can actually scrape stuff and get a lot of information back, even augment it, right? So it's easier to find and lock targets and get to know them by using AI. Number two, Gen AI. You start sounding more human than they were before. You know, in the past, and I think we're all gonna agree that phishing attempts, they were kind of somewhat easy to spot in the sense that there were grammar mistakes, things were incoherent in messages, or you could spot things from a mile away. With Gen AI, this is actually giving them the ability to look and sound more human than they were before. And that translates into being more persuasive in the scams that they're attempting to pull off. Then there is a polymorphic code, which is not anything new, code that is actually gonna be changing over time in attempts to be evading detection. With AI, that becomes more of a thing because models can generate that type of code at scale and highly customized at a very high speed, right? We also have some turnkey tools that we see available on the dark web, such as Spam GPT, Worm GPT, and Fraud GPT, which are essentially turnkey solutions for scams. They just subscribe to those services and they got access to a model that can actually give them a lot of tools for them to exploit. Then we have the situation of a malicious infrastructure that is being quickly deployed. That level of automation is also not news in the industry. We know about this. But at this point, they can actually reach another level of scale and speed in those things, right? And a great example of that is what we have in number 6, which are the DGAs. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with a DGA? Domain generation algorithms. Okay, some of you, thank you. So that is essentially the ability that they have using AI and automation to create domains that are gonna be essentially, they have a pattern to them. So the name of the domain is gonna have like a keyword, it's gonna have a dash and then numbers following that. They can create hundreds, and in some of these attacks, we're gonna go over the threat reports, we've seen thousands of DGAs being created. And that gives the ability for them to do two things. Number one, to quickly create domains and deploy certificates, the entire infrastructure, associate that with a cloud. And number two, once one of them is taken down, they can restart by taking up the next one. So that gives them, a level of persistence and continuity that we haven't seen before. And then finally, number 7 that we're gonna see through the talk today is the use of social media and search engine optimization, so the use of browsers to post malicious messages, right? And to gain actually more followers and to incite people to repost their own content. So we're talking here about advertising, social media, and forums, and we're gonna go deeper into that. Question for you at this point, out of these 7 uses of AI by attackers, which ones are more easily detectable? And I'm gonna need volunteers, of course. Thank you, patterns, right? So I'm
If you've got URLs that don't make sense from a logic perspective, because it's a word and then a bunch of numbers, that's not a typical pattern for a URL.
right. So patterns, right? What doesn't make sense and all of that. How do we teach the machine, though, what doesn't make human sense, right? Any other ideas? What is, yes, please.
Polymorphic code isn't really always that polymorphic.
It can still be detected and create patterns along the way. Thank you. I like that, right? So what you're seeing here is a little bit of an iceberg effect. What you see towards the end of the list is usually what is more easily detectable. And that poses a challenge for us because we cannot necessarily tell whether AI is behind an attack or not. We're gonna see some examples today. Here are the threat reports that my team has been developing. So this was developed by the Pre-Crime Labs. It's a division of Before AI that actually researches threats and posts reports out there. This is a pretty good taste of what we have available there. We do have a few more. I'm just gonna give you an overview of what they are. Starting from the top, natural disasters, and then we're gonna go to the right. So LA wildfires and the Texas flood scams, 2 big disasters that happened over the last year, and they were used by attackers in an attempt to exploit people. Tension in the news, we have the elections in 2024, we have tariffs, uncertainty, and then the Trump and Musk feud. We have global events such as the FIFA World Cup or the Paris Olympics. I'm pretty sure that whatever happened in the Paris Olympics also happened similarly with the Winter Olympics. Then we have geopolitics and government. We have Venezuela. We have the Iran unrests that preceded the current conflict. We have the US Department of Education, and we have more. We have the Dubai police scam advisory there. Unexpected and opportunistic. We have Duolingo decided to kill their mascot in social media for like a day or two, and people exploited the death of the mascot as well. Bybit opportunists, and there is the case of the hot malicious pizza. They're all crypto scams. So there is someone that created a shop online to sell pizza, and people actually bought pizza that never got delivered, right? So that is the hot malicious pizza right there. The CrowdStrike incident was a big one back in the day. And then we had Perplexity's Comet browser launch that also created opportunities out there. Telegram APK campaigns, this is becoming more and more prevalent. The use of messaging apps APIs to actually run attacks. I'm gonna give you a few examples today. And then for luxury retail and CPG brands, consumer packaged goods, we have several reports there, and also in the financial sector. These are all available at Before AI under resources and reports. There are a few more that were published more recently. There is the commercial airlines impersonation. So commercial airlines around the globe are being impersonated and how people are making money off of that. And we have also the romance scams posted online. And there's always something coming, right? For the presentation today, before I get there, I just wanted to give a moment to pay honor to the team that is developing these reports. Abu is the lead of this team, and Rishika is behind most, if not all, of these reports. And we're gonna learn as we go a little bit about their process, how they're researching into these things. And time allowing, I'm gonna teach you how to make your own threat reports. Before we get into the specifics, I wanted to also mention that there are ways in which we can actually cross and stay ahead of the attackers there. So talking a little bit about the use of a predictive AI in detecting malicious domains, right? The idea is that with the use of AI, you can counter an AI attack as well. And you do that because you can actually observe, and using the signals that are available, you can predict that a particular infrastructure is going to be malicious, right? So the key data that we're going to be using is NRDs. How many of you are familiar with the term newly registered domains? By show of hand. A lot of you, thank you. So you're familiar with that. So I wanted to ask you strategies for us to actually learning newly registered domains. Whois record, but how do you know that new domains were created?
Well, you're going to have information on whois as to what the data is created.
Yeah, yes, but that is after you have detected that that is a new infrastructure. How do you learn that there is a new infrastructure?
I don't know, but I'm happy to learn.
Zone files, thank you. Any other ideas? Certificates, very good. CTL, what else? All right, very good. I appreciate y'all's input. Also, passive DNS is another source, if you have access to passive DNS, right? So, in brief, zone files, how do you get access to that? IANA has a very wide coverage of domains that they provide access to, and there is even a tool for you to do that, to gain access to the zone files. Essentially, the zone files are published by the registry, the entity that actually owns the TLD, right, the top level domain, example.com, .net, .org, .xyz, and so forth, right? They have a zone file in which they publish each one of these domains that are being created, right? That we have available for most, but not for all. Key exceptions being .com, .org, .net, and a lot of the CC TLDs, the country-based TLDs. We're talking .de for Germany, .china, Spain, Brazil, and other places like that, right? So we need alternative sources. CTL logs, right? Certificate transparency logs. They are another source of that, not 100%, but a reliable source. And then finally, passive DNS can also see what people are trying to get to, and you can learn comparing from what is new and what is old, right? The other things, and this is to your point earlier about whois, right? You can use whois or similar tools to actually get DNS records. And if you do this often enough, you can see how those infrastructures are actually evolving over time. So you start seeing behavior. And if you have a database of behaviors that configure maliciousness, such as predictive AI has, you can capture maliciousness by behavior, right? So in short, our process is going to be looking at infrastructures, looking how they associate with one another. So imagine that if you had a map of the entire internet, and you're able to tell how each one of those infrastructures associate. And you have two main pools of data, one that is known good and known bad domains. Using predictive AI, you can associate a degree of maliciousness with each infrastructure at the time that they're being created. Plus, if you do this mapping soon enough, frequently enough, you're going to be able to get the behaviors, right? So this is what predictive AI uses to do that. So before we move on the conversation to the threat reports themselves, I wanted to give you a few ideas around, how would you go about doing that manually, right? So the first thing that I have there is checking reputations and associations, IP, ASNs, registers, TLD certificates, and various other DNS records. They provide you with information that you can check against a reputation score, right? That is the idea behind block lists. You have a block list and you can check the reputation of a particular infrastructure, right? This is how you do manually when you do not have predictive AI. You can also check on recency. So recency of the registrations and recency of the certificates and how short these certificates are. And by the way, I'm not saying that each one of these things individually configure maliciousness. What I'm advocating here is for, expanding the context, right? The most important thing in capturing threats when they come from an external attack surface is context. So I'm kind of attempting to expand the horizon and give a few ideas around how you could be running that. Then we have the thing of legitimacy, right? You can compare the DNS records from one infrastructure to one that you know that is legit. Or if you are protecting an environment, an enterprise organizational environment, you can compare to your other infrastructures, right? That is another way to tell, first, if they're different, and second, if they're the same. Depending on the record, if they're the same, that actually configures a problem because they are attempting to impersonate an organization. Then we have pivots, which is the most important thing that you can use when you're attempting to dismantle entire campaigns. You want to pivot. You found a registrant. You found someone that possesses a particular IP. You want to know which other infrastructures they own. And when you do that, you end up uncovering many, many more domains. And now you have the ability not only to dismantle a campaign, but you have the ability to deter the attacker, right? Because you can disable their accounts. This is what we've seen in practice operating with takedowns, is that sometimes when we pivot into campaigns, we can find campaigns that are not affecting just one organization, but an entire sector, several companies. Sometimes we can see that they're actually staging things for future attacks. You disable their accounts, you take away all that infrastructure, and you provide them, first with the costs, and second, a big effort that is all gone to toilet, right? So remember this, best thing to dismantle campaigns is to pivot in finding the threat actors. And finally, content, which is, depending on, there are so many strategies for rendering browser content these days. There are many attempts at evading, cloaking information, and there's also geofencing. By show of hands, how many of you are familiar with geofencing? Many of you, thank you. All right, so that is another thing. You need essentially a space, an environment in which you can actually see what people are seeing in different regions of the globe in order to be able to see attacks for what they are, right? In closing, the beauty of using predictive AI in doing all this is that you can collect enough evidence ahead of time before attacks are actually started. So speaking of before AI, more than 80% of the takedowns are actually performed before there is any content available on the infrastructure. So there is real potential for this to be a way of using AI against attackers that are powered by AI. This is what we're going to come back later to, which is how to build these threat reports. Just want to make sure that we're going to have the time to go over my selection here. So I've selected out of the 25 reports that I have on screen, I have selected 4 under the guise of newsworthy material. So I have selected the 2 natural disasters and the 2 for tension in the news. And there they are, right? And those are the ones that we're going to be covering today in detail. So let's just start with the LA wildfires. This is something that caught a lot of attention because it's unusual, and it happened, believe it or not, January 2025. They have attempted to do many things with, in regards to the LA wildfires. They attempted to impersonate insurance companies. They were, of course, attempting to raise funds and gather donations. They were working on the rebuilds and also attempting to simulate fire departments in trying to get a PII from people. So, and again, this is all exploiting the sympathy and the concern that people have for things. So, if anything, you know, out of today, you're going to see repeated patterns, and that you can actually take away and kind of spot these things early, in your own environments. And second, there's also this recurring level of psychological levers that they're exploiting. We're going to talk more about that in a second, but I wanted to give you like the high-level KPIs of this. So 119 domains were created in 6 days following the incident. So you can see that when developing these threat reports, it's really about registrations that happened around the event. And the keywords that they used were LA fire, wildfire, relief, fund, and rebuild. You know, probably very intuitive to kind of spot these and to see that they're related to the event. 58% of these registrations came from GoDaddy, but there were a few other registrars that we usually associate with less reputable ones, right? But so a lot of these you can see they're coming from reputable registrars that have strong abuse policies, right? That's the main point here. 70% of those were .com, followed by .org and .net. This is really impressive because this is an attempt at them to give authority and reputation to the registration, to the domain, and not attempt at something that doesn't make human sense. There's also the use of the TLD.fund, which is kind of interesting because it's probably a recent TLD and it becomes a target for this kind of exploitation. That being said, some of the attacks that they have attempted to make were emergency assistance and relief. So essentially, they were exploiting people that were victims, and they were attempting to get money out of people, right? People were applying for emergency assistance, and they were giving away their PIIs. Legal and insurance services, again, victim exploitation. That feels really terrible, right? Considering that some of these people lost everything, or, at a minimum, they were in the largest pickles of their lives along with their families. And also cleanup and reconstruction services, attempting to get more PII and get donations. Here's one example of donations that they have attempted to use. And this is how their ability in finding relevant content has augmented. I assume most of us are familiar with GoFundMe campaigns. It's a place, it's a platform for donation campaigns for various uses. What you see on the left was essentially a campaign in which they were saying, help this dog that was a victim of the LA wildfires. And in reality, that dog has been posted 3 years before online, and the dog was a victim of cancer, right? So essentially, they're using an image that they know that has appeal to the public, and they're exploiting that in a new context, which is really interesting. And this is going to be one of those recurring themes around how they're exploiting things nowadays. It's really about they're becoming really good marketing traction people. They know how to explore, how to exploit channels like social media and forums, and use those psychological levers to get results from people. On the right side, what you have is vulnerable animals, and they're talking about horses that were affected by the LA wildfires. And this has a very large appeal to people, and people were donating serious money to them. Another thing that is going to be pretty recurring, and I'm going to show you a few examples as we go. Merchandise stores. People love buying T-shirts when there is an event, and people love buying other things related to that. So this is another example of a hot pizza, right? You buy a T-shirt, pray for the LA wildfires, and it never gets delivered. Notice that, I didn't notice that until now, but they use an image that is probably the same one that I used to be the cover of this piece of the presentation, right? So I can tell they're pretty good, right? They're mimicking me. This is another very interesting pattern that we're seeing nowadays, and it's becoming pervasive, which are the crypto pump and dump schemes. How does that work? They get a relevant topic, they agitate people, or people are already agitated by the news, and they just feed into that. They mint a crypto coin. They start posting that to relevant forums in which people that are crypto-friendly, early adopters of cryptos, X is probably one of these places, and they actually get people to repost their content, right? And they start pumping that thing in the sense that they create a sense of a FOMO, right? The fear of missing out of a great investment opportunity leads people into investing into these crypto scams. We have a couple of meme coins, that is how they're calling them these days, that were actually coined and used at this, right? There is, I think LA Fire was pumped to 1,500%, and then it was completely dumped. They walked away with the entire money. Now transitioning into the Texas flooding scams. I live in Austin, Texas, and this happened about 1 hour away from Austin. So very close to me, and some of these people were actually affected by, of course, these are rivers, right? But there were waves of water that were as tall as 20 feet of water, right? It was a massive thing that happened in the region, and kind of unheard of, at least in this scale. We're gonna see that they were, again, exploiting the victims and the public with things that were very similar to the LA wildfires, which kind of takes me to the point of, that is one of the reasons why we teach these kind of things. It is because these are becoming recurring kind of attacks, and they are actually industrializing these type of attacks. So in the next opportunity, they're gonna be deploying the same kind of patterns. Speaking of the KPIs for this campaign, we have 70 suspicious domains in 10 days of the onset of the situation. 46 were considered suspicious registrations after the flood's resolution. And in this particular case, we're not deeming them as necessarily malicious. We're calling them suspicious. And this is not a minor thing. This is very important, because as we're developing threat reports, we want to be very, protect the integrity of people. We do not want to point fingers to people that are doing legit things. So in this case, we're calling them suspicious, because we couldn't necessarily assert whether they were malicious or not. What were some of the reasons for the suspicions here? There was the reuse of a subdomain style phishing paths. / register, claim, donate, and volunteer, right? That becomes similar to an attempt at exploiting the public in that situation. Cloning of known relief or news pages, very much like lookalikes from previous campaigns and situations, right? So that tells us, they're trying to exploit, and probably there is a template for industrialized exploitation. Some domains redirecting to Telegram or WhatsApp bot links. This is amazing. These messaging platforms publish APIs that actually allow people to bypass. They no longer need a C2 infrastructure. They can use the API of the messaging app to actually perform the rest of the attack. So that gives like, an upper hand in terms of infrastructure that they can use. They were using here. Whois privacy was enabled on 94% of these domains. And the majority of them were hosted in free page builders, right? Which is also another pretty big pattern. I'm pretty sure you heard about a Vercel being attacked over the past week, right? Make no mistake, there is the possibility of people using subdomains in free hosting platforms to host, particularly when it's about content, persuasive content that is going to be pulling people in a particular direction. Now, less than 10% of these were available on VirusTotal, which tells you that a lot of these infrastructures that we're reviewing today, they go unnoticed, right? And finally, these reasons for suspicions, once again, individually, they do not configure maliciousness or even reasons for suspicions. Take a look at the entire context when you're doing these. These are some examples: disaster claims fraud, donation and relief, volunteer registration baits, e-commerce abuse, search redirection and cloaking of data, and reputation piggybacking, right? Just like, .orgs and .gov style names that would give authority to infrastructures. A few examples: merchandise shops, things that people purchased that never got delivered, and plus they now have their credit card numbers, right? Transitioning now over to the Trump and Musk feud. They fight, the internet gets entertained, and threat actors exploit. That happened in June last year, and that is a big example now transitioning from disasters into newsworthy material, right? Some of the KPIs that we found there: 39 crypto domains created 2 days of the onset of the situation. The keywords, you can see that there is a lot of verses in there, and of course, names, right? And then we have, billion-dollar betting, private access, and game. So this is interesting, right? Maybe for us that are less familiar with the crypto space, some of these keywords, they wouldn't necessarily mean anything. But for people in the space, they actually mean, and they create authority and credibility. I'm kind of surprised by private access, but, that seems to be an exploit into a FOMO. Nonetheless, 54% were .com. So a little less. They were using other TLDs for this kind of attack, such as XYZ.info, online, fun, space, WTF, live, site, store, and .icu. This is kind of interesting because this is starting to show another kind of a pattern happening here into the crypto space, which is creating deep fake lives, right? So the live keywords and .live domain is not a random choice. These are very intentional choices on their end. And again, using APIs so that they do not need to build C2 infrastructure. And without needing to build C2 infrastructure, they also avoid detection on that end. So here's one example of multi-channel possibilities being created by these messaging APIs. To the right, you have a message that was posted on X, and it's essentially pumping people to actually jump into their crypto. And not only that, to actually repost this context. So this is important, right? Because now we're talking about people that are not only investing in advertising their fraud, but they're getting others to post about that. Of course, they're going to be needing psychological levers to do that. In this case, essentially they're talking about people becoming soldiers, right? So there's a sense of belonging here. and that could be exploited into other dimensions as well. Then there's a bunch of, I have a list here of IOCs for crypto scams, which also is a reminder that in all these threat reports, you're gonna get lists of IOCs. I haven't mentioned this to you, but at any given point, we're, before starting looking into these threat reports, the team is looking at thousands of domains. And they're able to actually figure out how many of them are really malicious, which is a little bit of a funnel, right? So think about a funnel, a triangle in which you go from many to the vital few ones. For these crypto scams, there was also the work of checking out crypto forums in social media. But as you can see from the list, it's essentially exploiting the personalities involved in this situation. There's also gaming and engagement lures. So some attacks, they actually had games that were built with these two people. So you had Trump and you had Ellen, and they were both being featured in their games. And there was also betting and merchandise. I think poly market became a larger thing this year, and I just cannot stop seeing that on the news about a fraud that was generated, insider fraud and things of the sort that were actually being used in this channel. So that kind of preceded that in a few months, but the mechanism is essentially the same. You can bet on outcomes. And of course, good old merchandise. And then finally, we have the situation here of the US elections. So the 2024 elections, we found a few patterns there that I'm gonna go over with you, right? Number one being campaigns centered around the candidates. Presidential level and local level alike, primarily presidential, of course, but there were a few local campaigns. You can see that the keywords are mimicking names, and that the emotional exploit here was patriotism, fear, or anger. So these are very powerful emotions that are gonna be driving action from people, right? And we gotta be mindful of what's happening here, right? The idea is that they would be collecting PII, including credit card numbers, and of course, getting donations from people that were agitated by those emotions. Then we have the situation of enduring infrastructure. So you can see that a vote and election, they're kind of generic because they could be applying to any election. Maybe some of you are fans of that movie, Napoleon Dynamite. So yeah, maybe that could even apply to the election that people are voting for Peter, right? Vote for Pedro, right? It was Pedro back in the day, right? What is the power of having a generic domain in content? It is the fact that it is enduring. And it could be applied or manipulated. The content could be pivoted to a new thing in every new situation. And at the same time, you actually avoid detection. So this is pretty convenient. And that is the power of taking down malicious infrastructures and pivoting to campaigns, because you eliminate all of that effort that was built by the attackers. We also have here a big advantage for them, which is those domains built to endure, they end up building credibility, right? Remember when I told you that one of the ways of looking into maliciousness is recency, right? In this case, no, they were registered 5 years ago. They were registered 3, 5, even sometimes even more. They have long-standing certificates, right? That makes you think that those are legit infrastructures, when in reality, again, it's about to endure, right? A lot of these campaigns were also applying misinformation. So you have a vote suppression. They were giving away information that was wrong about places where people could be voting, locations, dates, and times. And the idea is that they would be avoiding people from showing up and voting, right? That misinformation was also used along whistleblower websites. The type of website in which you read news, quote-unquote news, about what a person said or did or what they're planning on doing, and they have levels of fakeness and lacking in reality. So there was a lot of that in this kind of a situation. Merchandise shops, some of you can see, like, they're pretty simplified, right? We're talking about using deep fakes, but in this case, you have pretty simplified type of graphics in the t-shirts. And again, a recurring pattern, free website hosting platforms in which they have zero cost at posting content there. A lot of, for this particular situation, for the election, we detected that a lot of the content was coming from China. So that kind of gives a hint of people from abroad having interests in things, and or redirecting things, a good old redirect to adware or spyware, making people waste time or actually attempting to get into their devices. More crypto pump and dump, of course, and you can see that this is the language of how this is posted out there, how the crypto community kind of consumes content, which is kind of amazing, right? In the sense that they're becoming better marketers, they're marketers themselves in exploring these forums, in learning how to talk to these particular personas, right? Here's another example of a social media traction. They're posting a particular meme, and they have a coin associated with that, and they're manipulating all those levers, right? Since we do have time, I'm checking here, let's talk briefly about the attacker profiles, right? Who are these people, right? First, let's start by saying these are not state-nation attackers. These are not advanced, persistent threats. These people have other objectives. Their tooling is way more sophisticated, and it's about stealing IP and trademarks from governments and organizations, military, commercial, critical infrastructure, and so forth. And when I say IP here, I'm talking about intellectual property, right? No, so this is not the case. Their objective is to stay hidden, but in this case, it doesn't apply. These are smaller attacks, and these are the type of things that we can clearly see them visible. And then what we have, we're left with opportunistic scammers and coordinated profit seekers, right? They're exploiting the human nature in the sense that they're exploiting the fear of missing out. They are exploiting sympathy from people. They are using the tactics of building rapid infrastructure. So quickly deploy these things on the onset of a crisis and then get some money and then move on to the next thing. They are also using reputation piggybacking via their content. We also have the sales of non-existent goods and things of the sort, right? So these are how the attackers are exploiting attackers today. Before we wrap up, I do have a couple minutes before we open up for Q&As. And I wanted to talk briefly about how to make your own threat reports. So the idea here is that you have a very large triangle, which is that process that I mentioned to you. You're going to go from thousands of newly registered domains that you're going to be analyzing on a daily basis, right? I don't know if you know this, but on any given day on the internet, we have anywhere from 100 to 500,000 new domains being registered. So the amount of data is really large, and you gotta filter this down using the keywords, right? But you're gonna see smaller dark triangles in there, which means, as you go from domains into keywords, and in keywords you start inspecting content on those infrastructures, and from those you start deriving the TTPs that we described today. You can do also the opposite as you're doing. As you're inspecting the content, you can learn about other potential keywords, and you can augment your scope of a search. Same thing, when you learn about a TTP, you can look back into everything that you have already reviewed and see if other campaigns are exploring the same TTPs, right? So it is a little bit of a convergence, but there's also a divergence process in the making of these threat reports. So if that makes sense to you, I'm opening now for Q&A. Before we do that, I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity. Maybe at the end of this talk, we can mint our own crypto coin. I am suggesting Crab. Maybe, I don't know if the name is taken, but that would be a name to honor BSides Baltimore in their 10 years since inception. I would love to connect with you, and I'm going to leave the QR code for you to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm open to questions via LinkedIn or right now. Thank you. No questions, huh? All right. Yeah, regular expressions, right? So working with our domains, we're very used to typo squatting, which is the process of changing an I for a 1 and so forth, right? So the same rules apply to those. All right, so repeating the question, right? A lot of context in the art space. There's also exploitation of sympathy from people, and there's also content that is being created. And the question that was asked was, this applies to newsworthy, this applies to each one of us, right? If we're protecting a particular individual organization against these type of attacks, would the same rules apply? And the answer is yes, right? That was the objective today, is that you can take this to use and protect your own brands, the organizations that you serve. Right, so and your question would be, or is that a comment? So if I understood you correctly, right, when you own a TLD, you have certain obligations to ICANN, and their contract means if you do not prevent abuse, you're going to be punished, and that could be as far as losing the TLD entirely. Yes. So as far as ICANN, they have placed over the last couple years, probably a little longer than that, but over the couple years, a lot of effort and a lot of discussions into abuse prevention, to the point that TLDs, registries, are investing a lot in protecting their TLDs against abuse. First and foremost, because if captured short enough, within 7 days, they can get the registration, the ICANN registration fees back, right? And that multiplies, right? To, you know, it's $1 or $2. But, you know, if you have thousands of domains applying to that, you know, that can, over the course of a year, become large, right? And second, because the community is realizing we have to fight bad TLD reputation, right? This is the point where some of the commercial providers were a few years ago, and they have invested time and effort in making them less of an option for attackers to use. Right? To the point that we're seeing some of that migration, you know, some of the attackers are migrating from those into subdomain providers, free content hosters, right? So that is more or less the dynamics of the market precisely for those reasons. Thank you. All right, folks, this is time for me. You've been an amazing audience. Thank you so much.